Fight for the unborn. An abortion ban is upheld in Arizona. We have White House reaction. FBI arrest. Why a Catholic pro-life leader is facing federal charges. Demanding accountability. How a Republican majority in Congress might change policy in Washington, D.C. And plight of migrants. The Holy Father's call to care for the world's refugees. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, September 26, 2022. Thank you so much for being with us tonight on the Feast of Saints Cosmas and Damian. I'm Tracy Sable. We begin tonight in Arizona, where a judge has ruled that a ban on nearly all abortions can be enforced. The case has a long history. It involved a nearly 50-year-old injunction which stopped enforcement of a 1901 law. Friday's decision held that the injunction no longer had a legal basis after the U.S. Supreme Court overruled Roe v. Wade in June. Arizona's law bans all abortions except in a situation to save the mother's life. The White House press secretary ripped into the court ruling today, calling it dangerous and backwards. White House correspondent Owen Jensen has more. Owen?
Tracy, good evening to you. In a written statement the press secretary released over the weekend, she said, and I quote, "The potential consequences of this ruling are catastrophic, dangerous, and unacceptable," end quote. But pro-life groups see it as life-saving.
Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre heads to the podium for today's briefing.
Arizona is now the 16th state where Republicans officials have stripped women of their rights through extreme, unconscionable, statewide abortion bans.
But pro-life group Live Action tweeted, "Abortion is now illegal in Arizona. Every abortion murders an innocent, helpless human life. We stand with Arizona and every state working to defend our youngest and most vulnerable from violence." Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris in Japan, meeting with Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. She's there to pay respects to former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who forged closer ties with the United States. He was assassinated in July.
As you have said, the alliance between Japan and the United States is a cornerstone of what we believe is integral to peace, stability, and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region.
Also overseas in Vienna, U.S. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm at the International Atomic Energy Agency calling on Russia to
immediately withdraw its troops from Ukraine and cease military activity at and near Ukraine's nuclear facilities.
Back home, as Americans battle persistently high inflation, the Biden administration announces a proposed rule it says would prevent airlines and search sites from hiding the true cost of airline tickets. And in the East Room today, President Joe Biden honors baseball's best.
Welcome to the White House, the 2021 World Champion Atlanta Braves.
Also at the press briefing today, it was emphasized how the president and the White House are trying to bring down costs for consumers. You can expect to hear a lot of that leading up until Election Day. However, the GOP tweeting out today, gas prices are on the rise again. Separately, it was announced today that in December, President Joe Biden will host French President Emmanuel Macron at the White House for a state visit. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
In Michigan, an 84-year-old pro-life volunteer is recovering from a gunshot wound. It happened last week while she was handing out pamphlets about the state's ballot measure on abortion. A dispute broke out at one house. The incident is under investigation. A pro-life supporter who regularly prays outside of a Philadelphia abortion clinic is facing federal charges for allegedly assaulting a clinic escort. Pro-lifer Mark Hawk is a Catholic father of 7. His family says that he was arrested Friday by more than 24 FBI agents who came to the door with their guns drawn. A senior FBI source told Fox News that the guns were not drawn and only around 15 to 20 agents were at the home. If convicted, Hawk faces up to 11 years in prison. We go now to Amber Athey, Washington editor for the American Spectator. Amber, great to see you. What more do we know about this story? It appears that local authorities investigated the Planned Parenthood escort's claims, and they decided not to pursue a case, yet now Hawk is facing federal charges. Help us unpack this.
Yes, it's incredibly unclear why the federal law enforcement agencies chose to pursue this case about a year after it originally happened and was chosen not to be pursued by local law enforcement. The pro-life activist, Mr. Houck, says that he was engaging in pro-life activism outside of an abortion clinic when one of the employees for the clinic decided to verbally accost his young son. And when Mr. Houck stepped between his son and the abortion clinic worker, the clinic worker refused to stand down and continued trying to get to his son. And that was when Mr. Houck decided to push the abortion clinic worker away. Normally, this is not something that would rise to the level of FBI agents or members of the SWAT team raiding your home in the early hours of the morning in front of your wife and your children. But there is a federal law that indicates that individuals are not allowed to prohibit access to abortion clinics. It seems to me that this law is being applied rather generously here, considering it doesn't seem like Mr. Houck was trying to prevent the clinic worker from actually accessing his place of employment, but was trying to protect his young son. And there's been, as predicted, and as there should be, righteous outrage about the Biden DOJ's decision to pursue this case at this time.
Yeah, we're going to continue following this for sure. Meantime, as we just reported, a pro-life volunteer in Michigan was shot while going door to door. And over the summer, a pro-lifer in Kansas was assaulted while going door to door. And our own Catholic news agency says that since early May, there have been 86 attacks on churches and pro-life pregnancy centers. This is also very concerning. Amber, what do you think this signals? And do you think enough is being done to protect pro-lifers?
Unfortunately, there does seem to be a violent contingent on the left that has pro-abortion activists using intimidation to try to get their way and to try to convince lawmakers to not outlaw abortion after the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Really, this all started with the protests outside of the Supreme Court justices' homes when that leaked draft opinion on the Dobbs case came out. Those protests were illegal according to U.S. code. You're not allowed to try to intimidate or sway the mind of a Supreme Court justice on any ongoing case. And yet the DOJ refused to investigate or pursue any prosecutions in those cases. And so they unfortunately sent the signal to these activists that they can continue to try to pressure and intimidate pro-lifers by any means necessary.
Yeah, we have about a minute or so left. I want to talk about some new poll numbers that were released over the weekend showing President Joe Biden's approval rating at 39%. Now, that is according to an ABC News Washington Post poll. Amber, does that number surprise you at all? And what do you think that means for the president and for the Democrat Party going forward?
The number is not surprising when we look at polls on what issues matter most to Americans heading into the midterms. We see them mentioning things like the economy, inflation, and the southern border and the immigration crisis that's happening there. And the president has very bad approval ratings on all of those issues. Even White House Press Secretary, or former White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, said in an interview this weekend that if this is a referendum on President Joe Biden, the midterms are going to look very, very bad for Democrats.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Amber, thank you so much for weighing in. Always appreciate it.
Thank you.
A Denver area pro-life clinic is thanking police for their response to a vandalism incident. Bella Health and Wellness was targeted with disturbing graffiti yesterday. An arrest was made within hours. The nonprofit clinic offers full OB/GYN care in keeping with Catholic teaching. Cardinal Joseph Zen and 4 pro-democracy defendants appeared in court today. They deny state charges related to a legal fund for Hong Kong protesters after anti-government demonstrations in 2019. The Holy See has not made a public comment on the case. Well, New Zealand has held a state memorial service in honor of the late Queen Elizabeth II. Today was declared a public holiday as part of the commemoration. Hundreds attended a ceremony at the Cathedral of St. Paul in Wellington. The nation chose to wait until after last week's funeral in Britain. Our record floods in Pakistan have left more than 1,600 people dead. Many remain at risk from waterborne diseases. Pakistan has lost much of its cotton and food crops. The country's prime minister estimates that around 4 million acres were washed away during the monsoon season. Pope Francis participated in 2 events over the weekend in 2 different Italian cities. On Saturday, the Holy Father went to Assisi for a brief visit where he spoke at the Economy of Francis meeting. Yesterday, the Pope visited Matera, where he celebrated the closing Mass of the 27th National Eucharistic Congress. Joining us now from Rome is Andreas Thonhauser, EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief. Andreas, great to see you as always. Can you tell us more about the weekend travel of the Pope to Assisi as well as Matera?
Sure, Tracy. So last week we already spoke about Pope Francis's travel inside Italy to Assisi, where he was present at a conference called the Economy of Francesco. He invited more than 1,000 young economists, philosophers, and some entrepreneurs to develop new approaches towards economic understanding. And yesterday morning, Pope Francis then went to Matera, a city in southern Italy about 260 miles from Rome. And just as an aside, the City of the Stones, as it is also called, became famous through the latest James Bond movie. Also, Pope Francis went there in a vital mission for the world. He participated in the closing of the 27th National Eucharistic Congress and promoted the Eucharist as the center of our faith.
And Andreas, can you tell us a little bit more about what happened at the celebration in Matera? Was there a special message from the Pope to the faithful in Italy?
So the Holy Father celebrated with more than 80 bishops from all over Italy in front of more than 12,000 faithful. And in his homily, Pope Francis recalled that, and I quote, "The Eucharist is a prophecy of a new world. It is the presence of Jesus who asks us to commit ourselves so that an effective conversion happens, from indifference to compassion, from waste to sharing, from selfishness to love, from individualism to fraternity," he said. And the Holy Father recalled how Matera is not only the city of the stones, but also the city of bread. And precisely for this reason, in his final appeal, he invited the faithful to return to Jesus and the Eucharist. He said, "Let us return to the taste of bread, because while we are hungry for love and hope, or are broken by the travails and sufferings of life, Jesus becomes food that feeds us and heals us." Now, another important message of Pope Francis had to do with 2 things. Yesterday was the day of the Italian elections to the parliament, deciding who will govern the country, and it was also the 108th World Day of Migrants and Refugees. The Holy Father is well known for fiercely advocating for the rights of refugees. He also did so in Matera, reminding those present of how important it is to welcome those who were forced to leave their homes. It might have also been a reminder for Italian politicians, because the elections saw a landslide win of conservative to far-right parties.
And before I let you go, Andreas, quickly, can you tell us more about the Italian elections and also what they mean for the Catholic Church?
Sure. So Giorgia Meloni is the leader of the Fratelli d'Italia, which means the Brothers of Italy party. And she clearly won the elections and will likely be her country's first female leader. She's in a coalition with other right-of-center parties, including Silvio Berlusconi, a controversial former Italian prime minister, and Matteo Salvini, who, as a minister of the interior, closed down harbors for refugees coming from Syria and other war-torn countries. Meloni seems to be a bit more balanced on the issue of immigration, and still, tensions between the Holy See and her potential future government are still likely to be seen. However, there seems to be an openness towards the Catholic Church simply by telling from the election campaign that she led, in which she tried to attract Christian voters. In a recent interview, Meloni told the Washington Post that she believes in Christian values that help shape our Western civilization. In the same interview, she rejected gender ideology and adoption by same-sex couples, but instead said that having a father and a mother is best for a child. So, Tracy, very interesting times ahead here in Italy.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Andreas, for that report. Always appreciate it. Coming up, hurricane watch. Florida's west coast prepares for Ian. Plus, How Republicans plan to govern if they capture a congressional majority. Hurricane Ian is nearing Cuba after lashing the Cayman Islands with winds and heavy rain. The forecast calls for landfall on Florida's west coast as early as Wednesday with Category 4 strength. Governor Ron DeSantis has declared a state of emergency across the entire state. Tampa and St. Petersburg are in the storm's projected path. With an eye on taking back the U.S. House in the November midterms, Republicans introduced their blueprint for governing. The commitment to America promises accountability, something Republicans say has been in short supply in a Democrat-run Congress. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales takes a closer look at possible GOP investigations. Eric?
Well, good evening, Tracy. You know, from the origins of COVID to the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan to even the crisis at the southern border, House GOP members say that they have a long, aggressive list of investigations that they want to see happen if they do, in fact, take the House in November.
What will be a change is we will hold government accountable, regardless of who's in the administration. That's the responsibility of Congress.
You're going to see the oversight committees working overtime, getting answers to questions that Speaker Pelosi has just deep-sixed, put down on the shelf. She won't even hold China accountable. She surely doesn't want to look into anything regarding the Biden administration. That will change with a Republican House.
Whip Steve Scalise tells me Congressman James Comer will chair the Oversight Committee, holding China accountable for all the fentanyl they're bringing through the southern border, which killed more than 100,000 young people in America last year. The Foreign Affairs Committee will be looking deeper into the withdrawal from Afghanistan that left behind $80 billion worth of equipment and more, plus the deaths of 13 service members, and asking why Americans were left behind.
There were 2 Marines in southeast Wisconsin who were injured at the blast at Abbey Gate during a botched evacuation in Afghanistan. So that's incredibly personal to me. We need investigations to determine why did the president not follow the military's advice.
Republicans also want answers from Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, from abortions being performed on illegal immigrants with taxpayer money to the lack of action on threats facing America.
You know, again, Mayorkas, I've said, he's going to have a reserved parking spot because we have so many questions about the open southern border.
Congressman Jim Jordan will lead investigations into the Justice Department, including why they haven't prosecuted anyone from Jane's Revenge, who has taken responsibility for attacking and vandalizing Catholic churches and pregnancy care centers.
We are committed to doing the investigations that need to be done. After all, that is part of our constitutional duty, to do the oversight and make sure you, the country, we, the people, have the facts and the truth on all these things that the Democrats have done to us.
Republicans tell me that they also plan to shut down the January 6th commission, and they also plan to launch an investigation into whether Hunter Biden's business dealings has compromised President Joe Biden. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
Up next, how a Supreme Court ruling is impacting school choice in Maine. And the Holy Father encourages a devotion to focus on God rather than self. Israeli police are on guard in Jerusalem for Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. They arrested 2 people last night after a protest at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. On Friday, more than 35,000 worshipers prayed at the Western Wall. Thousands more are expected to visit the Old City for Judaism's high holy days. Well, back here in the United States, as we reported on Friday, a Catholic high school is the first religious school in Maine to receive state tuition funds. Cheverus High School in Portland was the only religious school to apply for the state's tuition reimbursement program. The move comes after a Supreme Court ruling in June. It is likely that more religious schools will apply for the funding next year. And we go now to Angela Morabito, spokesperson for Defense of Freedom Institute and the former press secretary for the U.S. Department of Education. Angela, so good to be with you today. Quickly refresh our memories about the Supreme Court case and how big of a victory that ruling was for religious schools and school choice in Maine.
this was a huge victory in a case called Espinoza v. Montana. And in that case, the Supreme Court struck down Blaine amendments, which was a product of anti-Catholic bigotry, I believe more than 100 years old. These amendments in state legislatures and state statutes that said funding for school choice programs could not be used at religious schools. This was designed from the start to shut out Catholic schools, and finally, those amendments have been struck down. So what Maine is doing is finally taking advantage of that new freedom, putting it to good use, and allowing a parochial school to receive those taxpayer dollars and go to work for students.
And Angela, for those who don't know, how exactly does the tuition reimbursement program work? And also, how will now more students and families benefit from it?
So programs work a little bit differently in every state, but what they all have in common is that the student wears their funding like a backpack. So the funding that is set aside to educate that child travels with them to the school of their choice. It just doesn't go to the school that they're assigned to by the government. It goes to where that child wants to be. And in some reimbursement programs, like what you described, the family does have to fund the money initially, but they get a rebate, they get a refund from the government because those tax dollars that have been assigned to their child are actually being put to work for that child's education.
And overall, talk to us about how this particular Supreme Court ruling for schools in Maine impacts school choice in other states.
Well, the Supreme Court ruling affects schools nationwide, so Maine is just the one that happens to be taking advantage of it today. We're going to see this happen all across the country. And what we know for certain is that whenever school choice programs open up, parental demand just goes through the roof. I could find no record of any school choice program that landed with a thud. Anytime the opportunity is there, we see huge demand for it. We've seen it recently in Arizona and New Hampshire, even in Florida, where as soon as school choice opens up, there are thousands upon thousands of applications. So I expect that very same thing to happen in Maine. And the benefit to students is tremendous. Not only is this wonderful news for religious freedom, but even if you take religion out of it and look at this in purely economic terms, it actually costs less to educate one student for 1 year in a Catholic school than it does in a public school. And statistically, the test scores are better. So by allowing public funds to go to Catholic schools, we're actually getting more bang for our educational buck. It's being put to work to best serve the public interest.
Almost out of time, Angela, but I quickly want to talk about something else, switching gears here slightly. California, as you know, kept its schools closed for more than a year during the coronavirus pandemic. And now the state says that it's going to delay the release of test scores for students for several weeks and possibly until after the midterm elections in November. I want to get your thoughts on that and also what the reasoning is behind this.
Well, the reasoning is purely political. This is about trying to hide the abysmal results of extended school lockdowns. What we saw recently in the nation's report card data is that students who were trapped in government schools where unions kept them closed for a very long time, they suffered the most. There was real and substantial learning loss that demands a significant response from their district, even from their teachers. We've got to help these kids. So California is purely playing politics here. They know the scores are terrible. And by the way, the teachers' unions did too. That's why we saw this past summer, both of the major teachers' unions were voting on resolutions to try and get out of standardized testing. They know they can't defend their product, so they're trying to hide the results.
Well, Angela, thank you so much for your time today. Great to have you on as always.
Thank you so much, Tracy.
Finally tonight, Pope Francis reminds the faithful that the Eucharist teaches us to adore God rather than ourselves.
Impegniamoci tutti a costruire un futuro più inclusivo e fraterno.
At a Sunday address following Mass in Matera, Italy, the Holy Father called on the faithful to rediscover Eucharistic adoration. The Pope also prayed for peace in Ukraine and Myanmar. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.